Now I'll tackle the question of why is it that I actually believe these stories from classical antiquity and times beyond of what now in the common modern era would be considered myth. Simply put, I believe these stories because they are real. You understand? They are real. And as we go through this study of the human psyche and our beliefs and the way historical events change and alter these things, we'll unpack it more and more. But it seems like we reach this inflection point of what we now call the coming of Christ, and people act as if that just erased everything that came before. In my childhood, I can still remember meeting people who would genuinely be extremely serious about the world being 2,000 years old. Like, this is when it started. And I was young. That doesn't make any sense, right? And then when you look at things historically, of course it doesn't. The Proto-Indo-European people migrated through Europe and changed the entire genetic makeup 4,000 or 5,000 years before the whole debacle in the Holy Land, so to say, happened. And that's just the thing. It's okay if you're converted and you become Christian and things like that. But at the end of the day, that is not, if you're of European descent, that's not your genetic makeup. That's not where you descend from, right? And there's an entire universe of thought, existence, and the way we've carried ourselves that came long before that, right? And so much of what people say is the West, what they want to do is they want to undercut the fact that the West was built before Christianity, okay? Now, again, we'll get into it, I'm sure, in later videos and stuff like that. It's just like, I don't have certain qualms with the Christian aspect, right? But there are other things where it's like, oh, Christianity is the West. It's like, it's not really, right? The West was built before Christianity even existed. The West was built before the time of Jesus. Okay? You're talking from the politics to the philosophy, the ideas, the warfare, everything that characterizes the Western existence is really crafted in the, so to say, BC times. That's where we come from. And those are real times, right? Those are real times. These people really existed. And that's when I'm telling you about, that's why these myths, these stories are real. Because they were real to these people, and that brought them into the state to where they were able to accomplish the things that they did. Augustus built Rome, the city of marble, right? And all of the Greek city-states long before them that opposed massive empire rule from the Persians. This is the Western idea. And their religion is real and their lore is very real. And I feel genetically tied to it, right? Like, I am interested, and I've begun to study and understand more about the stories from the Abrahamic universe, but at the end of the day, that's not where my people come from. Okay? I am kind of like a typical American idea, right? It's very Irish, Scottish, that sort of northeastern England, the Danelaw English, and then Germanic, Frankish, some Swiss, very Western European, right? Very tied to the Proto-Indo-European beginnings. And that's why, personally, I just don't feel connected to the Abrahamic stories because I'm not related to them, right? And I don't want to keep foreshadowing, but I intend to go further into that topic. There's a lot more reasons underneath the surface of how those ideas traverse the globe than I think a lot of people are willing to platform. So we're going to talk about it a bunch. But what I'm saying here now is I believe these myths and I believe these stories because they're very, very, very real. And what I will say is that anybody who sort of scoffs at the idea and takes this high horse approach about how it's nonsense would be someone who, because you meet these people a lot, they think in such an elementary manner that they couldn't begin to comprehend what the stuff really means, okay? And how these people really actually thought. You know, it's like, consider the ways some people would try to write off, maybe let's use the Greek myths just as an example, you know, stories of Icarus and all the heroes and the gods. And because I remember this in a middle school social studies class, and the teacher would, as he would tell the stories, it's almost like he was doing stand-up comedy. Like, oh, here's the punchline. Here's what they said happened next. Ha ha ha. Like, almost laughing at the idea of these people being so ignorant that they would believe such things. But I believe when you look further into it, is you find very, very intellectual people in the past. Not fools at all. I mean, look at the architecture, the things they understood. That's what I mean about the West, like the sciences, the mathematics, the legitimate astrology. Like, these people were understanding these things. That's where we have our understanding from it. You know, they opened the door there, Pythagoras. And it's because these were wise people. And something that is overlooked all the time is the mystery schools, right? The Eleusinian mysteries, the Delphic mysteries. This is the places where real knowledge was passed down and obtained. And I believe as we go further, we'll understand that the myths worked as vehicles to explain morality to each other, especially in a world that is not black and white, as so many people wish it was. But the mystery schools still brought the truth, okay? It brought you in communication and connection with the divine. That is why the Iliad by Homer is so important. Is you're reaching the divine. That's why Virgil's Aeneid is so important. You're reaching the divine. And perhaps later we'll get deeper into how those things correlate into our broader narrative. But again, the people who believe the myths, the ancient, the classical world was steeped in ignorance, or they're steeped in ignorance themselves, right? That's a mirror projection. You know, they have such an elementary viewing of their own theology and understanding of the universe that they couldn't possibly comprehend or even cope with the fact that people from thousands of years ago know more than they do now. Right? It's an unsettling idea for people who drive cars around and take flights wherever they want, right? Turn lights on with the flip of a switch. They're so technologically advanced, couldn't begin to fathom that there are people from the past with more wisdom. But I certainly believe it was the case, right? And that's somewhere I believe you can see some transparency between then and now. It's like, sure, I'm sure back then there were people who took stories at face value and said, this really happened. And I would imagine they were low status, low education, and not very developed intellectually and beyond. Okay? Much like today, there are people who go, look in my book, it says this in my book, this really, really happened. And they don't have the theological, philosophical, any depth whatsoever to actually unpack and interpret and understand what is really being related to them. So, I'm a real believer. I'm not just somebody out here who is like, oh my gosh, these old stories from classical times are so neat. And I would like to study them and talk about them with other people. Like, no, I really believe this stuff. This is really my heritage. This is really my ancestors' world. Right? I'm not transplanted into some religion that was born in the Middle East, right? Because I'm not from the Middle East. I'm from Europe. And I will bear that until the day I hit the dirt. So that's what I'm all about, is understanding what made our ancestors so great to the point that we still use words and phrases and their lens on the world to help us understand how we see it here and now. Right? So that's part of my personal mission here, is to bring the wisdom of my ancestors, your ancestors as well, if you're from Europe, here, now, to the present moment, so we can reconnect our heritage and our strength. Okay? So, that's the answer to my question that I'm asking is, why do I believe in what is now commonly called myth? Well, because it's real. These are real people, real beliefs, real stories. Again, right? Understand what a myth is. It's not fantasy, right? We're not talking about Lord of the Rings or something ridiculous. A myth is a story that's either, perhaps 99% fictional or slightly or heavily embellished, but it's from a real time and place with real people, real events, real people, and they become myth, right? Because all of these stories were passed down orally, right? That was always been human tradition, is the sharing of stories. And that is also how people did get lost in dogma and indoctrinated into religion, because these stories were orally shared. You had to be able to understand the moral implications and the philosophical ideas. It wasn't just write this down and this is the new rule and law. Okay? So oral tradition was very, very important. And at the end of the day, these people really lived, right? You can speculate all you want if the heroes were real or this, and what I will say on that topic is, in terms of the creatures from myth and like all the monsters and things like that, the world before the modern one was very different. I believe much closer to a mythical fantasy than anyone would like to unearth. Just go ahead and look at all the things the Smithsonian is constantly trying to bury, or throw in the ocean for that matter. So people also have a hard time believing because we live in just this boring, mute world of grays and nonsense. But the old world, the true world, is magic. So again, whether you believe in the heroes and the stories and monsters or whatever, the people that existed that did amazing things did believe in them, right? And without their understanding and their belief in their own heritage and the stories that brought them up, what would it be, right? Everybody knows the kid from Macedon, King Philip's son, Alexander, and his legendary campaign. Everybody knows him. The guy slept with a copy of the Iliad underneath his pillow every single night. So, if what people will call perhaps the general who led the greatest campaign in military history, an unmovable legend, undefeated by time even, that man was inspired by these stories, by these myths. Why? Because they're real. because the implications of the stories are real. The morality of the stories are real. The heart and soul of the stories are real. So, perhaps we'll journey through them together. All right? Until next time.